Let's wait a second for folks to come in and we'll start shortly. All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the January 31st State Digital Equity Plan and Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program Stakeholder Briefing. On behalf of the State of California and the Department of Technology, we thank you for being here. We will begin the meeting very shortly, so please use the chat box to share your name, job title, and affiliated organization as more folks are coming in from the waiting room. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. Next slide, please. As you're aware, this meeting is being recorded. We will be posting the recording of this meeting, the slides, and transcripts to the Broadband for All portal. One of our staff will add the link in our chat. Presenters, please cue Amanda to advance your slides. For viewers, please select side-by-side speaker mode for the best viewing experience when slides are shared and for visibility of our ASL interpreters. Closed captioning is available. Please select CC closed caption on the bottom toolbar and select show subtitle. Please note that there is time allocated at the end of each agenda item for questions. Please use the Q&A box to type in your questions related to that portion of the agenda while the presenter is presenting. Please use the raise hand icon on Zoom or *9 if you're calling in by phone. Our team will elevate you and request that you come off mute or video. Please note we will also temporarily turn off chat while the presenters are speaking so that no questions are lost in the chat. Chat will be available during the discussion section. Okay. Next slide, please. We have a full agenda this afternoon with an opportunity for discussion after each agenda section listed here. We welcome you to turn on your camera and mic to participate during the discussion. In a moment, CDT's Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy Deputy Director Scott Adams will begin with a welcoming remarks and highlight key milestones of the DE Capacity Grant Program developments thus far. Next, Alex Bond, Principal from Broadband Equity Partnership, will discuss modifications to the DE Capacity Grant Subgrant Program Guidelines public comment. Next, OBDL's Broadband Administrative Manager, James Spencer, will discuss the Partnership Coordination Resource for the DE Capacity Grant Subgrant Technical Assistant Program. Lastly, as OBDL's Engagement and Operations Manager, I will review the tentative timeline and any next steps. As a reminder, at the end of each presentation, OBDL's Access and Deployment Advisor, Maria Kelly, will facilitate Q&A and a bidirectional discussion. Please feel free to turn on your mic or your video at that time to join us. First, I would like to introduce Deputy Director Scott Adams.
Thank you, Anne, and good afternoon, partners and stakeholders. It's really a pleasure to be here at our annual monthly update, and I want to just acknowledge our gratitude to each and every one of you and your organizations for the partnership that we've all shared over the last several years during the planning process, and now that we're shifting from planning and nearing to implementation. Appreciate just how much all of us bring to the table and how much our work complements each other. We also want to just take a moment to acknowledge that a significant number of our partners and fellow residents here in California have been impacted by the fires down in Southern California. Our hearts go out to you and much empathy for what you and your communities are going through. Also want to acknowledge that, we appreciate there's some other uncertainty out there and have much empathy as we all work forward on, achieving digital equity here in California. So can we go to the next slide, please? Wanted to just again use this opportunity to kind of level set and recap some of the milestones that happened over the last year, and really, starting on March 29th, which was one day after the National Telecommunications and Information Administration approved California's digital equity plan that we all collectively, developed together. They released their notice of funding opportunity for the California Digital Equity Capacity Grant. There was May 28th, which was the state submitted its sort of administrative application for our statutory allocation of $70.2 million, really highlighting that May 29th through October 24th was the NTIA's review of our application, and carrying in merit review process. And then we received notification that we would be receiving our allocation on November 4th, and the performance period on the capacity grant began on December 24th. Next slide, please. Wanted to also take a moment as kind of we recap this, is to highlight, as we had indicated in the state digital equity plan, that we acknowledge that the digital equity capacity grant is not going to be enough to implement the entire plan. It's a significant amount, but that really it's incumbent upon all of us to see other sources of funding, be it state or federal grants or private sector and philanthropic funding. So as we talk through the iteration of the design of the overall capacity grant and the sub-grant program, really want to make sure that folks that that we re-acknowledge that the way it's been designed is in the context of the other available funding out there, like the NTIA's Digital Equity Competitive Grant dollars, the NTIA's Native Entity Digital Equity Capacity Grants, other federal programs, and other state programs like CPUC's CACIT program and the Digital Divide grant that they have. Next slide, please. Thank you. I think with that, I wanted to really commend the hard work of the ecosystem here in California. I'm sure it is no surprise to many of you who have contributed to or are part of these partnerships, but in the spirit of seeking additional funding, we wanted to really congratulate the 13 California serving entities that were recommended to be awarded digital equity competitive grants from the NTIA. Collectively, the amount that was recommended is about $130 million, which is almost twice the amount of the digital equity state capacity grant. Next slide, please. Thank you. Also, because we're tracking other funding that is received and coming into the state, we really wanted to acknowledge and congratulate the 6 California tribal nations that were awarded almost or over $12 million in the latest round of the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program awards. So congratulations again. And I think every dollar that comes into the state is going to help implement broadband for all and the aims of the digital equity plan. Next slide, please. And again, looking at all other areas, wanted to also highlight that there was an award through the USDA's Rural Development Broadband Reconnect Program, and wanted to congratulate the Sierra Telephone Company that received an award over $11 million to implement one of their projects. And again, this is, I think, all good news, because historically, California has not necessarily received as much funding from this program. So really what the last 3 slides were intended to show is just how active and collaborative this ecosystem has been in being able to pull in other sources of funding to support the work of Broadband for All. Next slide, please. So now that we've kind of, the recap of what our milestones were and how, collectively we've all been successful at pulling in additional funds from outside of the state, I wanted to just circle back on really the purpose of the Digital Equity Subgrant Program. And the subgrant program is designed to fund entities across the state, regional, and local to conduct activities to implement the state digital equity plan. So really the focus to address digital equity barriers at the local, regional, and state level to support development of regional ecosystems and increase capacity to provide digital inclusion funding to trusted community partners and messengers, as was kind of outlined and highlighted during the planning process and in the digital equity plan, to endeavor to be equitable and allocate funding across every single county, given that there are communities and neighborhoods in every single county across the state, and where the digital divide is impacting folks and digital inequity is present. So it needs to be a focus here. And then to really encourage statewide innovation across outcome areas and covered population focus. Next slide, please. So that's really the basis of my update here. Really appreciate you taking the time, again, as always, to come together in partnership in the spirit of this bi-directional conversation. Love to open it up if there are any questions on any of the topics that I discussed.
Thank you, Scott. We don't have any questions in chat right now, but I can wait a moment if anybody has a question about our sort of where we started and where we're going to go. But we always remember that there's time throughout this meeting to ask your questions. So I don't see anything, Scott, so I think we can go ahead and move ahead. And next we'll have Alex Bond, Principal Equity Partnership, covering the modifications of the subgrant program based on public comment. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Maria. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as Maria mentioned, I'll be covering the modifications to the subgrant program. And first, just to set the stage, we want to start with some background on the subgrant program, which, as Scott mentioned, is funded through CDC's State Digital Equity Capacity Grant from the NTIA. So NTIA's overarching goal for this grant program is for these funds to help states implement their state digital equity plans, or SDEPs. And in addition to implementing the SDEPs, NTIA requires states to focus on 4 things in deciding, what projects or activities these grants will fund. So the first thing is all capacity grant funded programs must focus on the 8 covered populations that are defined in the Act. Next, programs must have measurable implementation strategies. So all programs should align with the state's measurable objectives and goals. All programs should produce long-lasting, sustainable, and meaningful change, and be guided by ongoing stakeholder engagement. So with that framing in mind, the subgrant program is really designed to advance, the goals in the California State Digital Equity Plan. And in particular, the subgrants will help California achieve goals 2 and 3 from the plan, which focus on ensuring all Californians have access to affordable broadband and necessary devices, and ensuring all Californians can access training and support to enable digital inclusion. These grants will also help the state achieve its policy outcomes, through the achievement of these goals. Before we move on, just want to note that goal 1 in the Digital Equity Plan, which focuses on the availability of high-performance broadband, will be addressed through other Broadband for All investments and the federally funded BEAD program. So, the capacity grant and the subgrant program is really designed to focus on goals 2 and 3. Next slide, please. So as a refresher, here's a deeper dive and a recap of what's in the California State Digital Equity Plan. On the left, we see the 8 covered populations here that are defined in the Digital Equity Act. So these are the groups that the state must focus on. And through the SDEP process, the state had to understand their barriers and needs when it comes to digital equity and develop activities to address those needs. So the 8 covered populations are individuals living in covered households. So these are households at or below 150% of the federal poverty line. Next are aging individuals, incarcerated individuals, veterans, individuals with disabilities, individuals with language barriers, members of racial or ethnic minority groups, and individuals who reside primarily in rural areas. So those are the groups and the covered populations that, by statute, according to the Digital Equity Act and the NTIA, EDT and the state has to focus on. Next are the key activities that are outlined in the SDEP as far as, what the state will do to achieve goals and address the needs and barriers that it found. So these are the 7 key activities, and we can see that the subgrant program is really designed to advance and implement key activity number 4. So having a digital equity capacity subgrant program that could fund a variety of entities to, implement digital equity and digital inclusion programs in their communities. And then we also see that other aspects of the capacity grant will help advance other key activities, such as activity number 5, funding state-managed digital inclusion programs, and activity number 6, developing digital inclusion tools and best practices that everybody, stakeholders across the state could use. And finally, the SDEP also focuses on 6 outcome areas. So, in defining measurable objectives like the state's objective to close the device gap or increase digital skills, for covered populations. The state also wants to make sure that these objectives are connected to outcomes in areas like education, health, digital literacy and inclusion, essential services, accessibility and civic engagement, workforce and economic development, and tribal collaboration. So making sure that all of digital equity goals and objectives can connect to some of these greater policy outcome areas. Next slide, please. Yeah, so with that background in mind, let's take a look at the design of the subgrant program, that we've laid out in the draft grant guidelines. So the subgrant program is really designed to focus on regional, local, and targeted statewide ecosystem development through 2 funding tracks. Track 1 focuses on regional and local ecosystem development. It provides a formula funding allocation per county geographic boundary. And, within these counties, CDT encourages 1 lead applicant, per geographic area. Subgrants in this track will provide funding for the development or refinement of regional or local digital equity plans. And, once these plans are finalized, these grants can also be used as funding for local entities to have the capacity to implement activities and projects, as outlined in their plans. So this local capacity is also meant to be aided by centralized services, such as like a statewide digital literacy platform that the state will provide. And in this track, eligible entities can serve as lead subgrantees for their county or multi-county region. And the idea is that, that lead subgrantee is going to coordinate administration of the subgrant for that entire geographic area. That would include planning, partnership development and coordination and implementation, across the entire region, and across, all the different partners. And along with this, they can make second-tier subgrants to other implementation partners in their area, to assist with carrying out programs and projects as defined in their plans. And these second-tier subgrantees could include local community-based organizations or other nonprofits. So that's track 1. Track 2 provides subgrants for the development of statewide ecosystems and innovation that would target a specific outcome area. So the ones that we saw before, outcome areas like education, health, workforce development, or for a specific covered population. So in this track, nonprofits and digital inclusion providers with the statewide reach for that outcome area or covered population should apply, as well as tribes and tribal consortia and associations. So yeah, this is the design of the program. And, as we saw before, this design is really meant to address the goals of the SDEP, as well as the requirements and focal points as specified by the NTIA for the capacity grant. Next slide, please. So here are some allowable uses of the subgrants. They could be used to develop local digital equity plans. They could also be used for broadband adoption campaigns, digital navigation services and programs, digital literacy and skills training, targeted device distribution, as well as technology or digital skills related workforce development training and apprenticeships. Next slide, please. So lastly, we just wanted to walk through the remaining public comments that we haven't covered in previous briefings and, the status of each one. So just as a reminder, in September and October, we had a public comment process where we, collected comments on the draft grant guidelines. And in previous briefings, we walked through the status of different themes and categories of public comments. So this is the last batch of comments that, we wanted to address today. So the first comment theme is around the subgrant name. So just an update for everyone. The subgrant program will be officially named the California Digital Equity Program, or CalDEP for short. So you'll start seeing that in our communications and materials around the subgrants. Another comment we received was, or theme of comments we received was around how many awards CDT plans to make for a county as a geographic area, and seeing if we could make multiple awards for the county, for a given county. So we are clarifying that CDT will not award more than one subgrant per county in track one. And as a reminder, applicants can also apply and be awarded for a multi-county regional application. And as another reminder, just because we're only awarding one subgrant per county, right, we want to emphasize that the lead subgrantee in that county can and should be coordinating with partners across the county, across communities, across municipalities, to develop their regional or local plans and activities, and as appropriate, make second-tier subgrantees, to specific community-based organizations or local entities. So, that is definitely part of the design and something that we want to encourage. Another public comment theme was around timeline of finalizing partnerships and second-tier subgrantees. So, these comments were, coming from previous experience with recent digital equity grant programs where applicants were required to list all second-tier subgrantees or partners, at the time of application, and it just created a huge rush and a lot of stress. So, one thing we're clarifying is that with this program, lead applicants, if they have partners and second-tier subgrantees already identified, they can list those in the application, but they can also finalize those partners and second-tier subgrantees after award. So just along with the design of the program, we really want lead applicants and lead subgrantees to have time to develop their regional and local digital equity plans. And through that planning process, they can then identify who should receive their second-tier subgrantees. So no need to have all of that identified at the time of application. We also received comments around second-tier subgrantee requirements and eligibility. And these comments were asking if, there could be any flexibility for second-tier subgrantees to maybe not have to meet all the eligibility requirements as defined, by the NTIA. So, one thing that we had to circle back with NTIA and see, what the rules are here. And unfortunately, we did get guidance that, per federal rules, all subgrantee eligibility requirements have to apply to subgrantees no matter what tier they are. So even if they're a second-tier subgrantee, they still need to have things like a unique entity identification number, or UEI, from stat.gov, and they also need to belong to one of the eligible entity categories. So that's something that will be clarified in the final grant guidelines. We received comments on track one's funding formula, suggesting different variables to include or different data sources to include. So in reviewing the various comments, the decision is that we want to stick as close to the formula that was specified in the Digital Equity Act and that the NTIA used to allocate funding to states. And then we also wanted to stick to some of the changes that we agreed on, based on prior stakeholder engagement, like the questionnaire that was released last summer around like which elements of the Digital Equity Act formula, should we emphasize. So we're not making any updates to the variables or the steps. So we are still going to focus on covered populations as well as look at relative lack of broadband availability and adoption in deciding the formula allocations to each county. But we are adopting one of the public comment suggestions, which was to use the most recent American Community Survey or ACS data on lack of broadband adoption, for that particular step. And the reason why we decided to adopt this is, we thought that it made a lot of sense to, take a look at the most recent data we have on broadband adoption gaps in the county in determining how we're going to allocate funds. And, that way we also ensure that funds are aligned with the plans and the data that folks will be using to develop those plans. So the latest ACS 5-year data set was released, for the year ending in 2023 back in December. And we are planning to incorporate that and updating the allocations, based on that data for that one particular step. We received comments on, how the state is going to reallocate unused funds. So let's say no applications were received for a particular county, and those funds are, no one applied for those funds for that allocation. So, in consulting with NTIA and in looking at the design of the program and, as Scott mentioned, wanting to make sure that we have are able to fund capacity and ecosystems in every single county across California. The decision is that any unused funds will be allocated in subsequent RFA rounds as needed. So if counties don't apply in the upcoming RFA round, we're planning to open a new round so that they could reapply, so that they could apply and conduct necessary outreach and promotion in order for applications to be submitted. We received comments related to the administrative cost cap that was in the draft grant guidelines. So, it was stated at 3% on administrative costs in the draft grant guidelines, and comments, said that for many subgrantees, it would just be very difficult to administer this subgrant, and stay under that cap. So again, in consulting with NTI and federal rules, we are removing that administrative cap and instead are adopting the federal indirect cost policy for indirect costs, so that subgrantees, if they have a NICRA, they could use that for their indirect. If they don't have a NICRA, they can use the de minimis rate of 15% of modified total direct costs, which aligns with the latest federal guidance. We received comments on the payments and invoice schedule for subgrantees. In the draft, it was a quarterly reimbursement process. And, comments asked if we could, look at allowing for reimbursements more frequently than that. Unfortunately, due to administrative process constraints and, looking at how funds are going to flow from the state to federal, from state and federal levels, we decided to keep the reimbursement process and invoice schedule as quarterly, just because there's just too many constraints to try to do reimbursements and payments more frequently than quarterly. The last batch of comments that we received that we want to address here are around the advance payments, and comments asking if we could go up to 25% of subgrant and make that available as an advance payment in line with some recent state laws. So this one is still under consideration. We want to make sure that whatever policy change we make here is in alignment with federal rules and guidance as well as state laws. So we'll have to, provide an update later on that final decision. That's still under consideration. Next slide. I think that's it for my updates, and happy to open it up to discussion.
Thank you, Alex. We'll now move into the discussion portion of the modifications around the grant guidelines. If you could raise your hand, and then I can acknowledge you and ask you to unmute and come on camera if you'd like to ask a question specifically. Alex is available. Again, always remember that if a question comes up later and we want to go back to Alex, we can. Mark Rivas, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, that'd be great.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. When can we expect a final document of the guidelines?
Yeah, I'll take that, Alex. Hi, everybody. As Alex mentioned, there's been some significant back and forth. I mean, this is a program that's funded by federal dollars that has to conform to 2 CFR, which is the, kind of the guidelines on granting, and then we have to conform those to state policies. And so there's some remaining items that we're working on. You'll see the draft guidelines when we launch the request for application period sometime in the third or in the first quarter of this year.
Thanks, Mark. And Scott, any other questions specifically to the subgrant program guidelines in response to public comment? All right, we do have one question in the Q&A, Scott, that asks if the capacity grant funds are at risk with the change of the administration and how much of the funding has been received by the state.
Yeah, thanks for the question. We can't really speculate on the impact to the funds right now. We know there's a lot of uncertainty that's out there, and we empathize with and share, some of the concerns that folks have. We're just going to keep our heads down and move forward as planned until we are informed otherwise.
Thank you, Scott. Waiting a few seconds more. There's a question regarding when the next RFA will be, but I believe you just answered the question when the first RFA will be released, so I'm not sure. Is that in relationship to the slide around round 2? Amy, if you could clarify, that would be great. Amy Hamblin, and then Amy Cortina will go to you. Oh, no, the second RFA. I don't think we have an answer to that question.
I can take the first one. We want it first things first, right? We want to do the first request for application, and it's our hope and our effort that it's fully subscribed and that every county geographic allocation is applied for and awarded either in a single county, coalition application or a multi-regional county application. So, given it's the state grant is a 5-year grant, and these subgrants will end up to be about a maximum 3-year, 10-month grant if everything goes out, by I think late summer. So I think that's the way that I would answer the question. So we'll cross the bridge when we get there if we have to do another request for application period. But I think, as Alex mentioned in his comment, what we would want to do then is take a look and see, what were the constraints around the county allocations that weren't either applied for and awarded, and do some pre-outreach and potentially pre-technical assistance to make sure that entities or coalition in those counties were prepared to actually apply for and receive the funds in a second round.
Thank you, Scott. And then Amy Cortina, we'll go to you, please.
Just a clarifying question about one of the changes as a result of the public comments. So Alex, you said that the previous requirement to have a cap of 3% for admin for indirect expense is now an organization can choose a de minimis. So like if my organization already has a de minimis with the Department of Labor, we do not need to have a negotiated indirect. Is that, I just want to make sure, because we put in an application in December, but we know this takes 6 months for a negotiation to go through, and with this administration could probably be longer. So I just want to make sure we don't need to rely on that to be negotiated. We can just take the de minimis if we have to. Is that right?
Yeah, if you don't have a finalized NICRA, you can take the de minimis, which is 15% of modified total direct cost.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Clint, we'll go to you next. You have your hand raised. If you could please unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. Yes, Clint Coley from Plumas County. This question is for you, Alex. So I really appreciate, the announcement that there'll be one subgrant per county, for the digital equity plan. My question is, since CDT canceled the rural routes for Plumas County, what should our strategy be trying to get involved in this and moving forward?
Client, I'm Scott Adams here with the Department of Technology. I'll take that. I think the question that you're asking is related to the middle mile, and we empathize, and we know that, like within Broadband for All, there are many different, programs that are helping us achieve digital equity. We can take that question back to the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative team and have them reach out, to you and connect with them. We understand that, there may be some areas where, just the availability of infrastructure may prevent utilizing or maximizing to the fullest the digital equity subgrant dollars to do the non-infrastructure related activities.
Yeah, Plumas County being a presidential declared disaster county because of the Dixie Fire in 2021 had lots of its infrastructure destroyed. So it's really difficult for our recovery not to have that infrastructure replaced or installed.
Thank you, Clint.
Thanks, Clint.
Yeah.
We'll either loop back with you online and make sure that we connect you either to the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative team or the Public Utilities Commission team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex and Scott, I'm going to try to combine two comments from the chat, and they both have to do with allocations by county. Potential allocations, when or where can we see the determined allocations per county, not the percent of the 70.1 million?
I'll take that. Thank you for the question. We are, like I said, we're finalizing. We wanted to come back first here to the stakeholders to respond to the request to take a look at the allocation. As Alex shared, that we've got the, we have added the or updated the ACS data to the 2023. It will be a slight modification to the percentages, but very modest. Probably anticipate we'll show the actual dollar amounts when we release the RFA at the later on this quarter.
Thank you, Scott. And a follow-up question, again, a combination of a couple. The question about what has CDT or broadband digital literacy received so far of the allocation? And has it received the entire 70.1 million, or is that a drawdown process?
CDT received on November 4th notification of our award for the full $70.2 million as obligated to the state, we in order for us to access that, that's a drawdown process. So we haven't received any funds or made any drawdowns on those funds.
Thank you, Scott. Patrick, I see you have your hand raised. If you'd like to unmute yourself, please. Uh-oh. Patrick says he's not allowed to unmute. There you are.
Thanks for the updates. And excited to see the way that some of the feedback's getting incorporated into the guidelines. Two questions. One is, like many folks on the call who may be involved in a competitive grant that was received, we're thrilled. $120+ million, which is almost twice as much as the capacity grant program. Super crucial. And we are all during a lot of uncertainty right now. All of our attempts to reach out to the federal government, specifically NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology, which is responsible for issuing our CD 450, which obligates the funds, which is a crucial step to ensuring that we get the funding. We're not getting any response. So my first question is, what steps, if any, can CDT or the governor's office take or someone take to help get us a response with some urgency from NIST regarding the competitive grant CD450s? And then my second question is related to this notion of like percentage versus dollar amounts, and appreciate that with the new ACS data, it might change the percentages, which would change the dollar amounts. But another huge part of the allocation is the percentage of money that goes to counties versus the percentage of money for statewide projects or state activities. My second question would be, are there any changes in the guidelines to the split between the counties, which I think is currently at like 54% of the funding and the state getting 46? I know that there's been some push to try to increase the size of the pot for counties. So is there any feedback on the commentary on allocating more monies to the counties as opposed to state activities? Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick. Like I said, we empathize with the uncertainty that's out there associated with just across the board when it relates to federal grants and loans. We're monitoring the situation and being as vigilant as we can. At the moment, I don't have a great answer for you in terms of how, either us or any other instrument of the state could intervene with NIST, given that that's particularly on the competitive grants is a grant direct to applicants. But please know that we know how important it is. And as soon as we get, any new information or any ideas that shows where we can help, we will do that. The second question that you asked about, and I think this really relates to, the allocations for the county geographic allocations going from percent to dollars. As we're looking at how we're administering the grant, we're looking at the state agency, digital inclusion programs and seeing what we can or cannot fund. So we want to have some flexibility for those to move around the percentages. So right now, what you see in the draft guidelines, which really reflects a no less than amount for the allocation. And we're looking at ways to increase it. That's going to, be informed on market research and what other kind of programs we can establish with the state agencies and what they come in at.
Thank you, Scott. Kari, would you like to ask your question now and unmute?
Yes, let's talk about those state agency allocations. Do the state agencies have to apply or accept the allocation, or are you just going to assign them their allocation? And do they have to have a plan for their allocation before their allocation is assigned? And what happens if they don't accept their allocation? You know who I'm talking about.
No, I don't. It's an interesting question. I would say this, Kari, that throughout the digital equity planning process and the digital equity plan, it was very clear that there was a role for state agency digital inclusion programs to play. There were some that were identified during the planning process and some that were identified afterward. And that we've been very clear about the buckets, that there would be a bucket of centralized services or tools and resources that could be universally either developed, curated, procured to support the work of the subgrantees, not be prescriptive, but to support the work of the subgrantees, and that some of the funds would be maintained by the state where they could have where there was a state agency that had a direct connection to providing services to a specific covered population. And there was like an economic plus efficiency, kind of combination that we could make significant progress on both on the outcomes associated with, both the measurable objectives and the outcomes associated with the plan. And so we've done extensive, market research and negotiations with a lot of different, I don't want to say negotiations, but market research and discussions with different state agencies right now. And at present, we've probably only focused on 2 that are a relatively small amount, and we're still trying to see if we can make it work. But those, are things that would be partnerships, between CDT and other state agencies that would be under the auspices of, the small amount of the funds that the state would be receiving to actually do work associated with the digital equity plan.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for the question. There is for the sake of time, and I will clarify, Wally, there's a couple of engagements on your question. If Scott did not just answer your question right now, can you just repost it and we'll answer it in the next round of discussion? But for the sake of keeping us on track, I'd like to introduce James Spencer, our broadband administrative manager, and he's going to cover the assistance program and partnership coordination resource.
Thank you, Maria. Hi, and good afternoon. Today, I'll provide updates on the CalDEP Technical Assistance Program. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, these are some of the plan resources we have communicated out, and we will provide more information or additional information on each component as it becomes available. Next slide, please. And so here, we're currently developing the landing page for the California Digital Equity Program, and we will build it out as more information becomes available. Some planned components of the landing page include a brief program overview, applicant eligibility, the different funding tracks available, get ready resources, and links to any additional resources. Next slide, please. So in response to public comments and other stakeholder input, we're also developing a partner coordination resource. The coordination resource will be a tool for potential applicants and other interested parties to identify partners and discuss what a collaboration effort might look like. So in addition to providing basic contact information, participating organizations will be able to identify their partnership preferences, funding tracks and activities, and county or counties plan to serve. Participation will be completely optional, and submitting information to the partnership coordination page and the contents of the information submitted will have no effect on an application. We're in the last stages of quality assurance verification for the landing page and partnership coordination resource, with plans to launch soon. Once published, the pages will be open for public view. That is my update, and happy to open up for discussion.
Thank you, James. I'll wait and see if anybody raises their hands or has any questions on this section. There are no new questions in chat yet. And again, we will have some time at the end for additional questions if something comes up. Oh, Monique Alvarado, if you'd like to ask your question, please. Unmute and ask your question.
Hi, I wanted to understand if we're opening up a partnership collaboration resource, approximately how much time will be given for people to look for partnerships? Because it seems like there's a very much like a wide level regional focus in these grants. So how much time will people be given access to that platform ahead of the RFP to work on those collaboratives?
Thank you for the question. We intend to launch it as soon as possible, and I think there's a very high likelihood that given some of the outstanding issues we've got to resolve, between state and federal guidelines on the subgrant program, that'll probably not be launched until sometime in mid-March. And so we would expect that the partner collaboration resource would be up for at least a month prior to the RFA and then during the entire RFA process. And so really, we know that there was a call for folks to want to have a way to connect with one another and to know who else was applying for applications, or interested in applying to lead or support in certain areas. And so, like James said, the team really tried to say, like, how could we put something together that it's not required or prescriptive, but it's a way that folks can kind of, raise their hands and say, like, this is what we're interested, this is what we're doing, and a way for folks to find each other if they don't already, know each other or aware of each other, and to potentially collaborate on a bigger, application.
Thank you, Scott. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm not totally sure how to say your name appropriately, but Kowena, please correct me.
It's Crystal. I'm using my partner Kavena's link, and honestly, I didn't notice it until you said something. So no worries.
Thank you. Okay.
Crystal Rawls, friend to the community. So I've been in these meetings before. I want to elevate Wally's question. I didn't understand the answer, and I understand the challenges that we're all experiencing right now. But to your best attempt, please be clear. The central services. How do we participate? And we've asked in several meetings, and we've been told we'll get an answer the next meeting or the next meeting. We would like to know, as a community, how do we participate in the central services?
Thank you for that, Dr. Rawls. Good to see you. And so I am looking at Wally's question, so we may want to answer that separately, because I'm not sure that that was what his question was about. The centralized services are things that we've called out in the state digital equity plan that were recommended by the public. So a digital literacy, assessment and training platform, a workforce development hub that could support folks. Those are the two things that we're looking at. And like we said, we've established, we've actually done a lot of market research that we've shared with folks. And given that those are procurements or potential would-be procurements, it's, I please note that when there is an appropriate time for us to come together and seek feedback and input from the ecosystem on how we can, further refine or modify our thinking or how we design those things, we will do that. It just hasn't been, in the order of operations, the time to focus on that. So we're not trying to hold that off. And we actually are really eager to hear more from the stakeholders on how we could design or modify, any centralized services beyond the two that are mentioned in the plan, and other things like the low-cost offer finder that we offer on the Broadband for All portal, or expanding on the digital equity resource finder that was the beta was developed out of the DEEM tool. So we've just been really prioritizing other things, like working with y'all to try to refine the sub-grant program so we can get that out as soon as possible.
Thank you, Scott. Let's jump to Ronald. If you'd like to unmute and ask your question, please. I'm looking. There you are.
Yeah, I couldn't unmute it first. I had to click OK in the middle, and I'm a quadriplegic, so my finger's slow. We are moving to Alameda. I'm in Michigan, in Ann Arbor, but we are moving to Alameda in a week and opening an office there. We are So I wanted to know about the CalDEP partners and how I can find out more about it. Especially being a quadriplegic, I do everything digitally, and we have a digital platform cooperative. It's a learning management system and a meeting place and a marketplace. And I'm looking to partner with people in California. We're already partnered with the broadbandtoolkit.com out of San Francisco. So how can I get more information about the CalDEP partners? The website is not launching yet because our platform, everything is licensed as community commons, Creative Commons, that is. And we are looking to make our platform available. And we're incorporating DeepSeek AI, which is free open source.
Thank you, Mr. Suarez, and I believe you said you're moving here soon, so welcome in advance. Our team will drop our contact information in the chat. They'll also share a link to the Broadband for All portal, which is really the central kind of storefront for most of what we're doing. The partner resource that James was speaking of and his team is going to launch, we'll share that link live once we'll share that link once it goes live, and it will more likely be in the next 5 to 7 days, and it will go out in a thank you message, likely to the folks on this call or in this meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. For the sake of time, and we have one more Q&A so we can answer final questions in just a couple of minutes, I'd like to introduce Ann Wynn, who's going to share with us about the timeline and next steps. And that may answer some of your questions, but if not, we will have a couple of minutes for final questions at the end.
Thanks, Maria, and thanks, everyone. Next slide, please. Thank you. What you'll see here is our SSTEP and the Capacity Grant Program implementation. Just to draw your attention to the 5 rows, and I'll not go in detail on each of them, but up to Q1 of 2025 was our administrative process as well as stakeholder engagement that we've done to collaborate on the design of the program that we've reported on so far, and just some tentative Q2, Q3 in which we will continue to engage with stakeholders. Row 4, you'll see this is familiar to last time, indicating that the period of performance started on December 1st of 2024, and thus we are currently in that phase. Row 4, subgrant application and award process, our 60-day RFA, 90-day review app, 30-day award is still consistent, and as Scott mentioned before, the RFA is tentative to launch this quarter of 2025. And then Amy, I know you asked about the TA timeline. Referring back to what Scott and James mentioned earlier, our first few TA resources will be launching very shortly. So within 5 to 7 days with the partner coordination resource, and then more soon after that. So please be on the lookout. We will communicate through the thank you emails as well as our email updates. So next slide, please. And just one note, the timeline is subject to change pending federal guidelines. So please bear with us, and we will be transparent and accurate of what we share in each stakeholder briefing. And then here, some of you are familiar with a few of our engagement opportunities, but to re-emphasize, our commitment is to, our values is to be transparent, to be equitable, as well as accessible with our information. At the same time, we want to be accurate with the information we share with you. So as you know, we have our quarterly public meetings, including the California Broadband Council and the Middle Advisory Committee meetings. In addition to that, we have created the stakeholder briefings and webinars like this to increase our bidirectional engagement and being able to take your questions, being able to converse and have this dialogue that we've been having. So we hope to continue doing this in 2025. And some of the other 4 you're very familiar with, the statewide implementation group, the outcome area communities of practice, strategies that we've done in the SDEP planning process, now going into the implementation phase. And as you've seen before in the chat, our Broadband for All portal is constantly being reviewed and updated to make sure that our information, that you get the information and the updates. And lastly, if you haven't subscribed already, please do so on the Broadband for Our email to get the Broadband for All email monthly update, where it covers not only digital equity implementation process, but all of our Broadband for All programs and initiatives as well. So thank you for that. I give back the mic to Maria to answer any questions, or to facilitate other questions.
I can try to answer. Thank you, Anne. Acknowledging that we're at time, if you're able to stay with us, please do. We just have one more question right now on queue. But this meeting is being recorded and you can view the end of it at another time. Louis, if you would like to open your mic and ask your question, please.
Hi, everyone. My question was for James. I was just wondering what kind of partnerships specifically you're going to be highlighting. So we're a IT reseller. We're very closely partnered with Apple. Apple's on the call with us too. We're just wondering if that's the kind of level of partnership you're looking for, or could you be a little more specific about what's going to be advertised on your under your website?
I'll take this one, James. So Mr. Bean, I'm wondering, so what James had shared was the partnership coordination resource that we've developed for specifically to connect people so that they could find each other, prior to and during the request for application period for the subgrant program. And the subgrant program is encouraging one lead entity per each county to develop like a coalition of partners and to go in and apply for the money, which would then fund a very small portion for planning. If there's not a plan for that area, to develop a plan that aligns with the state digital equity plan, and then allows the flexibility to subgrant the remainder out to second-tier subgrantees. And so when, what we're hearing from folks is if there are, particularly over the life of this, is that there have been, a concern about how can smaller, maybe new entrants to this find some of the bigger folks who are developing applications and get connected with them. That's really the goal of the partner collaboration resource. And so, when you look at the nature of what these grants will fund, which is planning plus capacity, and the capacity is really around broadband adoption, digital navigation, digital literacy training, targeted device distribution, and workforce development. I would think that your entity might want to identify yourself as, a potential partner in the device distribution or workforce development category if there's a component where you're refurbishing computers and teaching folks to do that. So I think that would be the focus of the partner collaboration resource. And then additionally, we've got another tool that we've developed that would kind of be like a developed centralized service where, to create a statewide appendix or search engine where both organizations and individuals could find, digital inclusion service providers, in their areas, in their cities, in their towns. So there's two different things, but I think you were talking about the partner collaboration resource, and I hope I answered your question.
You did. So that is a goal of part of what will be done through that website then. Perfect.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we were responding what we heard there was a need for, and we hope we hit the mark and created a space where people could find each other if they needed us to facilitate that.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And for our final question, Wally, I see it in chat. Is that the same question that you have your hand raised for? And if not, could you please, you'll be our last question. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Well, it's more or less, since the state is keeping, a substantial portion of the NTIA grant to develop centralized services. Look, for example, I've read in the earlier documentation that there was something, it's a cadre of people who are digital navigators, forget the exact name. Unless I know what that program is and how many they're going to be and how my subregion would apply to use them, I don't know whether to put that kind of thing in my grant application myself. And then the sort of corollary to that is, how do you know what you're planning for the state agency to produce is actually what the rest of us need? Unless we see your plan and can comment on it and say, wow, nobody really needs the digital navigators, as my example. I'm just saying, it's a lot of money and I want to see how it's being used. And so I don't have to apply for the same stuff.
Thanks. And I can appreciate that. Mr. Seebob, in the digital equity plan, I thought we mentioned that when we're talking, there's centralized services and there's state agency managed programs. And so centralized services are just tools and resources that would be incumbent upon us, on an administrator of a grant, to use our, either convening or procurement or purchasing power to make things easier to address the needs of the subgrantees. This is something that was called out in the planning process. So centralized services are, were called out very specifically in the digital equity plan: a digital literacy assessment and training platform, a workforce development hub, the annual online and mobile friendly digital equity survey, digital equity ecosystem mapping tool. And there are some other things that we would develop. The state agency digital inclusion services are, like I said, we've been doing market research and working with folks to see, what, if any, state agencies have programs that conform to the needs of them, addressing the measurable objectives and the outcomes in the plan. We're looking at 2 of those, and combined, it's a relatively small amount of the digital equity planning. And further, I think to answer the question about percentages is, we had said from the get-go, and this is why we ascribed a percentage in the draft guidelines as a no less than, is the NTIA allows states on grants of this size to, expend some portion of the funds on maintaining and updating the digital equity plan, on administration, on evaluation, and one other category. And we're committed to being as frugal with our administration as possible, so we can put as much of the funds into program as possible. And so part of what we're doing now is just working with the budget and trying to see what works and what fits mostly to our goal. But we appreciate that the feedback that we're receiving from the ecosystem about maximizing as much funding as possible to go to local and regional, and to clarifying as much as possible where centralized services can be used to support the ecosystem partners. Without getting too much into it, I think the state managed digital inclusion programs that we're looking at now probably would be more dependent on partnership with the subgrantee coalitions than the subgrantee coalitions would be potentially on the ones that we're considering. And as soon as we figure out if those are possible, we'll share more information with the ecosystem here.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions and your participation, and I'll pass it back to Scott to close us out this afternoon.
Thank you. Maria, I just wanted to say that we are grateful and humbled for your partnership. We hope we are that the progress that we're making and how we're engaging and sharing information is, living up to the promise and the bar that we're setting for ourselves, and that the ecosystem and asks us to do. We're eager to hear where we can do better. And we want to acknowledge that there is, some uncertainty at this time frame, and we share that uncertainty, and we're committed to continuing to move forward on this work together. Want to thank you again for all of your feedback and input. For those of you who are new to this briefing, wanted to let you know that there's a QR code here where you can sign up for our Broadband for All monthly email update. We've got our Broadband for All portal website URL right there, and the digital equity staff inbox is also on the screen. And so if there's any follow-on questions that we didn't answer, any requests for meetings or listening sessions, please reach out to that inbox and we'll get back to you. But just appreciate your time and your partnership, and wish you and your families really a good weekend and a good month until we next see you.